My husband left me for his secretary on our anniversary dinner with just a cold letter delivered by a waitress. Our marriage has run its course and I've found happiness with someone who truly understands me, the note read. I folded it neatly, paid for the champagne I'd been sipping alone for an hour, and walked out with my dignity intact. Little did Theo know that the next day I would be announced as the new CEO of Argonne Technologies, the very company he'd worked at for 15 years. The Ritz-Carlton's soft lighting and gentle piano music had seemed like the perfect backdrop for our 10th anniversary celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'd arrived early, as was my habit, wanting everything to be perfect. The maîtresse escorted me to the best table in the house, the one I'd specifically requested when making the reservation 3 weeks ago. A bottle of Dom Perignon, Theo's favorite, was already chilling in an ice bucket beside our table. Mrs. St. George, would you like to wait for your husband before pouring? The sommelier had asked. Yes, thank you. He shouldn't be long, I'd replied, checking my watch. It was only 10 minutes past our agreed time of 7 p.m. Theo had texted earlier saying he was wrapping up a meeting and would head straight to the restaurant. 1 hour later, I was still sitting alone, my repeated texts and calls going unanswered. The sympathetic glances from the waitstaff were becoming unbearable, their pitying looks making my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Just as I was about to call it a night, a waitress approached with an envelope. Mrs. St. George, this was just delivered for you, she said, her voice carrying a note of hesitation that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. The cream-colored envelope had my name Virginia, written in Theo's unmistakable handwriting. With steady fingers that belied the sudden hollowness in my chest, I opened it and unfolded the single page inside. Virginia, after much reflection, I've come to the difficult decision that our marriage has run its course. We've grown apart, and I've found happiness with someone who truly understands me and my ambitions. Lizzie and I have connected on a level I didn't think was possible. I'm moving out tonight and will be staying with her. I've asked our lawyer to draw up the divorce papers. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I'll always care for you, but it's time we both moved on. Theo, the words swam before my eyes, each one a dagger despite their clinical detachment. Lizzie, his executive assistant, the woman who had sent me flowers on behalf of Theo when he'd forgotten my birthday last year. The woman who had called me countless times with urgent messages that pulled my husband away from dinner, from weekends, from vacations. Across the restaurant, faces blurred as I forced myself to take a slow, deep breath. 10 years of marriage ended in a hasty note delivered by a waitress on the night that was supposed to celebrate our love. I carefully refolded the letter and slipped it into my purse. Is everything all right, ma'am? The waitress asked, hovering uncertainly. Actually, no, I replied with a calm that surprised even me. It seems my husband won't be joining me after all. Could I have the check, please? Of course, Mr. St. George has already taken care of it, she said, looking relieved to have something helpful to offer.
I see.
How thoughtful of him, I said, the irony thick in my voice. In that case, I'll just take the champagne with me. I placed $300 bills on the table, a generous tip to compensate for the spectacle my marriage had become. For your kindness tonight. As I gathered my belongings, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. For a moment I thought it might be Theo having second thoughts, but instead, it was from Gordon Wolfe, the chairman of the board at Argonne Technologies. Virginia, everything is set for tomorrow's announcement. The board vote was unanimous. Looking forward to welcoming you as our new CEO. Let's meet for breakfast at 7 to go over final details before the press conference. A strangled laugh escaped my lips. Tomorrow. The announcement I'd been working toward for years, the culmination of a carefully orchestrated career trajectory that had started in the forensic accounting department and led to this moment, set to happen the morning after my husband abandoned me for his secretary. The universe had quite the sense of timing. Walking out of the restaurant, I felt the curious stares of other diners who had undoubtedly witnessed the delivery of the letter and my solitary departure. I held my head high, shoulders back, stride purposeful. The cool September air hit my face as I stepped outside, bringing with it a strange sense of clarity. Theo didn't know, he couldn't know. Gordon and the board had kept the succession plan tightly under wraps. Only 5 people in the entire company were aware that I was about to be named CEO, replacing John Argon, who was retiring after 30 years at the helm of the company his father had founded. Theo, as VP of Sales, had been convinced he was the frontrunner for the position. He'd been boasting about it for months, dropping hints at dinner parties, already redecorating his home office to match the aesthetic of a CEO. He'd even bought a new wardrobe of suits, telling me they were befitting his imminent promotion. All the while, I had sat in confidential meetings with the board, discussing my vision for Argon Technology's future, answering their challenging questions about market strategy and growth projections, and gradually winning their trust and support. As I drove home to the house that Theo and I had purchased 3 years ago in the exclusive Oak Ridge neighborhood, I thought about what awaited me there. Would he be packing his things? Would Lizzie be with him? The thought made my stomach clench, but I kept driving. This was my home, and I wouldn't be the one to leave it. When I pulled into our driveway, Theo's car was gone. The house was dark and silent as I entered, but signs of his hasty departure were everywhere: drawers left partially open, empty hangers in the closet, his favorite watch missing from the bedside table. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at our kitchen island, opening my laptop to review my notes for tomorrow's meeting with Gordon. The words blurred before my eyes, as the reality of the situation fully hit me. My marriage was over. The life I had built with Theo had crumbled in an instant. But another part of my life, my professional life, was about to reach new heights. And Theo had no idea that the woman he had just discarded so callously was about to become his boss. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs along the path to this inevitable conclusion, but I had been too busy, or perhaps too unwilling to follow them to their logical end. 3 months ago, I had been working late at the office, finalizing a forensic analysis of a potential acquisition target. Argon Technologies was considering purchasing Meridian Systems, a smaller competitor with promising technology but mysterious financial discrepancies that had raised red flags during initial due diligence. John Argon had personally asked me to investigate before they proceeded further. The office was nearly deserted at 10 p.m., the finance department silent, except for the soft hum of my computer and the occasional ping of late-night emails. I was about to pack up when I realized I needed data from the sales projections Theo had presented earlier that week. His office was on the executive floor, 2 levels above mine. The executive floor was dark, but a thin line of light spilled from beneath Theo's door. I approached quietly, not wanting to startle him if he was on a call. My hand was raised to knock when I heard laughter, a woman's laughter, intimate and flirtatious. "The board doesn't have a clue," Lizzie's voice carried through the door, slightly slurred as if she'd been drinking. "John thinks that boring wife of yours is some kind of financial genius because she found that accounting error last year." "Virginia's good with numbers," Theo replied, his voice carrying that dismissive tone he used when minimizing my accomplishments. "But she has no vision, no leadership qualities. She's a glorified accountant. The board needs someone who can take Argon into the next decade, not someone who obsesses over decimal points." I froze, my knuckles an inch from the door. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. "Well, once you're CEO, you can restructure the entire finance department," Lizzie continued. "We could move her to the satellite office in Phoenix, or better yet, offer her a package she can't refuse." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Theo cautioned, though I could hear the smile in his voice. "But yes, changes will be made. The company needs a shakeup, and John's retirement is the perfect opportunity." I backed away silently, my heart pounding in my ears. I had known Theo was ambitious. It was one of the qualities that had attracted me to him when we first met at a company retreat 12 years ago. But this calculating coldness, this willingness to derail my career to fuel his ascent, that was new, or at least newly revealed to me. Instead of confronting him, I returned to my office and composed an email to Gordon Wolfe, requesting a private meeting the following morning. Gordon had been my mentor since I joined Argon Technologies as a junior accountant fresh out of graduate school. He had recognized my potential early on, and had been subtly grooming me for leadership, though I hadn't fully appreciated his long-term vision until recently. That night, when Theo came home after midnight, I pretended to be asleep. He slipped into bed, smelling of unfamiliar perfume and scotch, and turned away from me without so much as a good night. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly my marriage had become a hollow facade. The next morning, I met Gordon at a quiet cafe, 3 blocks from the office. "Virginia, you look troubled," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. At 68, Gordon had the sharp eyes and alert presence of someone half his age, missing nothing. "I overheard something concerning last night," I began, then recounted the conversation between Theo and Lizzie, careful to stick to the facts without emotional embellishment. Gordon's expression darkened as he listened. When I finished, he sipped his coffee thoughtfully before responding. "I suspected something like this might be happening," he said finally. "Theo has been lobbying board members aggressively, hinting that John has promised him the CEO position. Has he?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. Gordon shook his head. "John has made no such promise. In fact, you're still his first choice, and mine as well, but Theo has been planting seeds of doubt, suggesting your expertise is too specialized, that the company needs a sales-oriented leader in these competitive times." I processed this information, feeling a strange detachment, as if we were discussing characters in a business case study rather than my husband and my career. "What's your advice?" I asked finally. "Proceed as planned," Gordon said firmly. "Continue your executive leadership training. Complete the strategic vision document we discussed, but perhaps we should accelerate the timeline and be more discreet. The fewer people who know you're being considered for CEO, the better." "Including my husband?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Gordon's gaze was sympathetic but direct. "Especially your husband, Virginia. I'm sorry to say it, but I don't think his ambitions align with your best interests anymore." Over the following weeks, I watched Theo with new awareness. The late nights at the office became more frequent. The casual touches and affectionate gestures that had once been part of our daily routine disappeared entirely. He stopped asking about my day, my projects, my thoughts on company matters. When I brought up the possibility of a special dinner for our upcoming anniversary, he'd agreed absently, his attention on his phone. Meanwhile, my own schedule had become increasingly demanding. Secret meetings with the board, intensive coaching sessions with an executive leadership consultant, and confidential strategy discussions with John Argonne filled my calendar. I was being evaluated, tested, and prepared for a role I had once thought beyond my reach. 2 weeks before our anniversary, John called me into his office late one evening. "The board has made their decision," he said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "They want you, Virginia." The vote was unanimous. I felt a surge of pride, quickly followed by a wave of conflicting emotions. Unanimous? Even Martin Wells. Martin was notoriously aligned with the sales department, and by extension with Theo. Even Martin, John confirmed. "Your presentation on the 5-year growth strategy impressed him tremendously," he said, and I quote, "She sees around corners where others just see walls." "When will the announcement be made?" I asked, my mind already racing ahead to the implications. "After the quarterly results are released. We'll make it official at the all-hands meeting on the 15th. John leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Virginia, have you discussed any of this with Theo?" I shook my head. "No, our relationship has been strained lately." John nodded, unsurprised. "I thought as much." Gordon mentioned concerns. He sighed heavily. "I've known Theo since he joined us out of business school. He's brilliant at sales, but he lacks the character for true leadership. The board sees that now, thanks in large part to your quiet competence." As I left John's office that night, I wondered how to navigate the widening gulf between my professional ascent and my crumbling marriage. Should I tell Theo about the CEO position? Would it heal what was broken between us, or merely reveal the full extent of the damage? In the end, I decided to wait until after our anniversary dinner. 10 years of marriage deserved a proper conversation, a chance to chart a path forward, together or apart. But Theo had made that decision for us both, choosing a path I could never have anticipated. I first met Theo St. George at the Argonne Technologies holiday party 11 years ago. I was 28, 2 years into my role as a financial analyst in the company's forensic accounting division, and already developing a reputation for being able to spot irregularities that others missed, the division had recently uncovered a sophisticated embezzlement scheme at one of Argonne's subsidiaries, saving the company millions. John Argonne himself had sent a company-wide email commending our team, and specifically mentioning my contribution to the investigation. It was the first time I'd been singled out for recognition at that level, and I'd arrived at the holiday party feeling a rare sense of professional confidence. Theo approached me at the bar, his smile dazzling under the twinkling lights of the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom. "You must be Virginia Woolf, the financial bloodhound," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Theo St. George, Northeast Sales Director." "Financial bloodhound?" I echoed, shaking his hand. "That's what they're calling you in the executive suite," he explained with a charming laugh. "The woman who can sniff out financial fraud from a mile away." I was flattered, both by the nickname and by the attention from the company's rising star. Theo had a reputation for being brilliant, ambitious, and charismatic. At 34, he was already responsible for the company's most profitable region, with rumors that he was being groomed for higher positions. "It's just attention to detail," I demurred. "Numbers tell stories if you know how to listen." "And what story are the numbers telling about me right now?" he challenged playfully, leaning closer. "That you're exactly 2.3 drinks into the evening, based on your level of forwardness," I replied with a raised eyebrow. He threw his head back and laughed, a genuine full-bodied sound that drew glances from across the room. "Guilty as charged. But in my defense, it takes at least 2.3 drinks for me to work up the courage to approach the most intimidating woman in the room." "Intimidating," I repeated, genuinely surprised. With my sensible pantsuits and quiet demeanor, I was usually the one who blended into the background at company functions. "Absolutely," Theo nodded. "Intelligence is intimidating, Virginia, especially the kind that can't be faked." That night marked the beginning of a whirlwind romance. Theo was attentive, passionate, and seemed genuinely interested in my work and my perspective. Within 6 months we were engaged. By our first anniversary, we were married in a lavish ceremony that had been featured in the society pages of the local newspaper. "Sales prodigy weds financial genius, Argonne Technologies power couple ties the knot." In those early years, we were partners in every sense. We discussed company strategy over breakfast, debated market trends over dinner, and spent weekends mapping out our shared vision for the future. Theo celebrated my promotions with champagne and thoughtful gifts. I helped him prepare for high-stakes presentations, offering insights on financial projections that made his proposals stronger. Gordon Wolf, who had taken me under his wing shortly after I joined Argonne, initially expressed reservations about my relationship with Theo. "Be careful, Virginia," he warned during one of our monthly mentoring lunches. "Office romances are complicated enough, but when ambition enters the equation, things can get messy." "Theo supports my career," I assured him. "We're a team." Gordon had smiled sadly. "Just remember who you are outside of being part of a team. Your talent is uniquely yours." At the time, I dismissed his concern as old-fashioned caution. Now, sitting alone in the house that had once symbolized our shared success, I recognized the wisdom in his words. The shift in our marriage had been gradual, coinciding with changes at Argonne Technologies. 4 years ago, the company had begun an aggressive expansion, acquiring smaller competitors and entering new markets. Theo had been instrumental in this growth strategy, leveraging his sales expertise to secure key accounts that made the expansions possible. His success had earned him a promotion to Vice President of Global Sales, a position that came with significantly more responsibility and pressure. The long hours, constant travel, and high-stakes negotiations took a toll on our relationship. Dinners were canceled, weekends were interrupted, vacations were cut short. I had my own career advancements during this time, moving from senior analyst to deputy director of financial compliance, a role that gave me visibility into every aspect of the company's operations. My reputation for integrity and analytical precision earned me the trust of the board of directors, who increasingly sought my input on major financial decisions. John Argonne, the son of the company's founder and its CEO for nearly 3 decades, began inviting me to strategic planning sessions that were typically reserved for C-suite executives. Initially, Theo had been proud of my inclusion, seeing it as a reflection of our combined value to the company. The Argonne St. George dynasty, he joked one night after we'd both attended a particularly high-level meeting. Between your financial wizardry and my sales magic, we could run this place someday. But as my influence grew independent of his, Theo's attitude began to change. His comments about my work became dismissive, rather than supportive. He stopped asking about my projects, or sharing details about his own initiatives. When John appointed me to lead a cross-functional team tasked with evaluating acquisition targets, a role that would typically go to someone at the VP level, Theo's congratulations had been perfunctory at best. "It's just due diligence," he'd said, with a shrug. "The real work happens after the deals are signed." Around the same time, Lizzie Crawford joined the company as Theo's executive assistant. Young, ambitious, and efficiency personified, she quickly made herself indispensable to Theo. At first, I'd been grateful for her presence in his professional life. She organized his chaotic schedule, prepared meticulous briefings for his meetings, and seemed genuinely invested in his success. "Lizzie is a godsend," Theo had declared during a rare dinner at home, about 3 months after she'd started. "She thinks like I do, anticipates what I need before I even know I need it." I'd nodded, distracted by a complex analysis I was completing for the board. "That's great, honey. Everyone needs a good right hand." I didn't notice then how his eyes had lingered on his phone when she texted, or how our conversations increasingly included anecdotes about Lizzie's brilliant idea, or Lizzie's insightful observation. I was too focused on my own challenges, specifically, a confidential assignment from John Argonne that had landed on my desk that morning. "I'm considering retirement within the next year," John had told me privately. "The board has asked me to identify potential successors. Your name is on that list, Virginia." I'd been stunned. "Me? But I'm not even in the C-suite yet." John had smiled. "Titles are just formalities. We're looking for someone who understands the soul of this company, who can preserve what makes us special while guiding us into the future. You have that vision, that integrity." "Does Theo know?" I'd asked, immediately concerned about how my husband would react to this news. "Not yet," John had replied carefully. "The succession planning committee wants to evaluate all candidates thoroughly before creating a formal shortlist. I'd appreciate your discretion during this process." I'd agreed, telling myself that this preliminary discussion might lead nowhere, that keeping it from Theo temporarily wasn't really dishonesty. But as the months passed and the evaluations continued, leadership assessments, strategy presentations, confidential interviews with board members, the secret grew heavier between us. Now, as I sat in our empty house with the remnants of our marriage scattered around me, I wondered if things might have been different had I been honest with Theo from the beginning. Would knowing I was being considered for the CEO position have changed his behavior, prevented his affair with Lizzie, or would it have merely accelerated the betrayal, pushed him to undermine me more directly? The truth was, I would never know. What I did know was that tomorrow morning Gordon Wolfe would introduce me as the next CEO of Argonne Technologies, and somewhere across town, in what was presumably Lizzie's apartment, my husband would discover that the wife he had discarded so thoughtlessly was now at the helm of the company he had given everything to dominate. I slept surprisingly well that night, waking before my alarm to the strange silence of a house suddenly half empty. For a moment I lay still, processing the new reality. I was alone, betrayed, and hours away from becoming CEO of a $3.2 billion company. The juxtaposition was jarring. As I showered and dressed for the most important day of my professional life, I thought about what Theo couldn't know about my position at Argonne Technologies. Beyond the impending CEO announcement, there was another layer to my relationship with the company that had remained confidential for nearly a decade. I selected a charcoal gray Armani suit, classic, powerful, understated, and fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings. These pearls had witnessed 3 generations of Wolfe women overcoming adversity. Today they would witness mine. At precisely 6:45 a.m., I arrived at the St. Regis Hotel for my breakfast meeting with Gordon. He was already waiting in a private dining alcove, nursing a cup of black coffee and reviewing documents. Virginia, he stood as I approached, concern evident in his expression. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. Really? I added, when he looked skeptical. Your husband left you on your anniversary, and you're fine. Gordon's eyebrows rose. Either you're in shock, or you're the most composed person I've ever met. Perhaps a bit of both, I admitted, accepting the coffee the waiter poured. But today isn't about my marriage, it's about Argonne's future. Gordon studied me for a moment, then nodded. That's why you're the right choice for CEO. You've always been able to separate personal matters from business decisions. Not always, I said, thinking of the day 8 years ago, when personal and professional had become inextricably linked. But I try. Gordon seemed to follow my thoughts. Have you decided whether to tell the board about your other role in the company? I sipped my coffee, considering. Not yet. The timing doesn't feel right, especially with everything else happening. Let's get through the transition first. What Gordon was referring to, what only he, John Argonne, and 2 long-retired board members knew, was that I wasn't just an employee of Argonne Technologies. I was also one of its significant shareholders. 8 years ago, Argonne had faced a crisis. A revolutionary product line had failed spectacularly in the final testing phase, just weeks before its scheduled launch. The company's stock had plummeted, and a hostile takeover attempt by Meridian Systems, our largest competitor at the time, had seemed imminent. I was working as a senior financial analyst then, and had been part of the team assessing the damage. During a sleepless night reviewing financial models, I'd discovered a potential salvation, a dormant patent in Argonne's portfolio that could be developed to leapfrog the failed product line entirely. The next morning, I'd presented my findings to John Argonne himself. This could work, he'd agreed after hours of discussion. But we need time and capital to develop it, both of which are in short supply right now. What if I could provide the capital? I'd asked impulsively. John had looked at me with surprise. Virginia, we're talking about millions of dollars. I know exactly how much we're talking about, I'd replied. My grandparents left me a substantial inheritance. It's been sitting in trust funds and conservative investments for years. This would be a risk, but a calculated one. That conversation had led to an unusual arrangement. I had invested $2.70 million, almost my entire inheritance, in exchange for a 7% ownership stake in Argonne Technologies. The investment had been structured through a blind trust to maintain my anonymity, allowing me to continue working at the company without complications. The patent development had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, becoming the foundation for Argonne's most profitable product line. My 7% stake, initially worth $2.7 million, was now valued at over $120 million. I had never sold a single share. You know, Gordon said, pulling me back to the present, Theo is going to be blindsided twice today. First by your appointment as CEO, and then when he checks the company bylaws and realizes that you outrank him in every possible way. I smiled, despite myself. Let's focus on the CEO announcement for now, one bombshell at a time. Gordon chuckled, then grew serious. Virginia, there's something else you should know before the press conference. He slid a folder across the table. These came in from the forensic accounting team late last night. I didn't want to email them, given the sensitivity. I opened the folder to find a detailed report on financial irregularities in the Northeast sales region, Theo's original territory, now overseen by one of his protégés. Kickbacks? I asked, quickly scanning the highlighted sections. Gordon nodded grimly. Appears so. Your team flagged unusual patterns in the commission structure. When they dug deeper, they found evidence suggesting certain sales executives have been receiving additional compensation from clients, presumably in exchange for preferential pricing or terms. And Theo? I asked, my voice steady despite the cold weight settling in my stomach. Nothing directly links him to the scheme, Gordon said carefully, but as VP of Global Sales, he oversees all regional operations. At minimum, it represents a significant oversight failure. Or deliberate blindness, I murmured, thinking of the luxury watches and sports car Theo had acquired over the past year, purchases he'd attributed to exceptional performance bonuses. The timing is problematic, Gordon acknowledged. If this comes to light while you're announcing your appointment as CEO, it will look like I'm using my new position to target my husband, I finished. Especially given our personal situation. Exactly. The team has kept this investigation tightly compartmentalized, but we should decide how to proceed before the news breaks some other way. I closed the folder, my mind already processing the implications and potential approaches. We'll establish an independent review committee immediately after the CEO announcement. Outside counsel, no direct reporting relationship to me. Complete transparency with the board and regulatory authorities if necessary. Gordon nodded approvingly. That's the right approach. Keep your personal connection to Theo separate from the company's response to potential misconduct. Speaking of separation, I said, glancing at my watch, I should prepare for the press conference. My lawyer is meeting me at 8:30 to discuss divorce proceedings. You've already contacted a divorce attorney? Gordon looked surprised. I called Matilda Bryce last night. I confirmed. Matilda was the city's most formidable divorce lawyer, known for her meticulous preparation and uncompromising advocacy. Given the circumstances, I think it's best to move quickly. Gordon reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. You're handling this with remarkable composure, Virginia. But remember, you don't have to be strong all the time. When the dust settles, take some time to process everything. I nodded, grateful for his concern. I will. But right now, Argon Technologies needs a steady hand at the helm, and that's what I intend to provide. As we walked toward the hotel's conference center, where the press and Argon's executive team would soon gather, I mentally prepared for the confrontation ahead. Theo would be there, expecting to hear his own name announced as John Argon's successor. Instead, he would watch as his discarded wife stepped into the role he had coveted for years, and that was just the beginning of the revelations that awaited him. The conference room was already filling with journalists, analysts, and Argon's senior leadership team when we arrived. John Argon stood near the podium, looking distinguished as always in his bespoke suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He spotted us and made his way over. Virginia, he said warmly, taking my hands in his. Today marks a new chapter for Argon Technologies. I couldn't be prouder to pass the torch to you. Thank you for your faith in me, John, I replied. I won't let you down. As we spoke, I felt a familiar presence enter the room. Without turning, I knew Theo had arrived. His cologne, an exclusive blend from a boutique perfumery in Paris, announced him before his voice ever could. For the first time since receiving his letter, I would face my husband. And I would do so not as the discarded wife, but as the incoming CEO of the company he had sacrificed everything, including our marriage, to control. I didn't immediately turn when Theo entered the room. Instead, I continued my conversation with John, discussing the transition timeline we'd be announcing. My peripheral vision caught Theo's confident stride faltering as he spotted me standing by the podium with John and Gordon. This was clearly not where he had expected to find me, particularly not after last night's letter. When I finally did turn to face the room, our eyes met briefly across the crowded space. Confusion flickered across his features, quickly replaced by his practiced corporate smile, as he nodded in my direction with forced casualness. Beside him stood Lizzie, looking polished in a crimson dress that seemed inappropriately celebratory given the circumstances. Her hand rested possessively on Theo's arm, her fingers adorned with a diamond that had not been there the last time I'd seen her. So much for discretion. John noticed my gaze and frowned. I wasn't expecting her to be here, he murmured. This is an executive-level announcement. It's fine, I said quietly. Better to address everything at once. I watched as Theo worked the room, shaking hands with board members, exchanging jokes with fellow VPs, playing the role of heir apparent with practiced charm. Lizzie shadowed him, her expression a mixture of triumph and anxiety as she occasionally glanced in my direction. They thought they knew how this would play out. They expected me to cause a scene, to dissolve into emotional distress at being confronted with their relationship so publicly, so soon after being discarded. That reaction would only reinforce the narrative Theo had been crafting, that I was too emotional, too rigid, too focused on details rather than vision. Instead, I greeted colleagues calmly, reviewed my notes for the announcement, and pretended not to notice the whispers that followed me across the room. My composure was my armor. At precisely 9 a.m., Gordon stepped to the podium, calling the gathering to order. The room quieted as he welcomed everyone and outlined the purpose of the meeting. Behind him, a large screen displayed the Argonne Technologies logo, alongside the words Leadership Transition Announcement. As you all know, Gordon began, John Argonne has led this company with distinction for nearly 3 decades. Under his guidance, we've grown from a regional player to a global technology leader. Today marks a pivotal moment in our company's history as John passes the torch to the next generation of leadership. I sat between John and Clara Perez, our Chief Technology Officer, at the table on the dais. From this position, I could see Theo clearly. He had positioned himself near the front of the audience, his expression one of barely contained anticipation. Lizzie stood slightly behind him, her hand now resting on his shoulder. The board of directors has conducted an extensive search for the right person to lead Argonne Technologies into its next chapter, Gordon continued. We sought someone with deep knowledge of our business, impeccable integrity, strategic vision, and the ability to unite our diverse divisions toward common goals. Theo straightened his tie, a small, satisfied smile playing at his lips. After thorough evaluation of internal and external candidates, the board voted unanimously on our selection, Gordon said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. It is my great pleasure to announce that Virginia Woolf will be the next Chief Executive Officer of Argonne Technologies, effective immediately. The room fell silent for a split second before erupting into applause. I rose from my seat, accepting John's congratulatory embrace before stepping to the podium. As I moved forward, I allowed myself one brief glance at Theo. His face had drained of color, his expression frozen in disbelief. Beside him, Lizzie looked equally stunned, her hand now gripping his arm in what appeared to be painful intensity. The diamond on her finger caught the light, glinting accusingly in my direction. I smiled graciously at the audience, waiting for the applause to subside before speaking. Thank you, Gordon, and thank you to the board for your confidence in my leadership. I began, my voice steady and assured. John, your mentorship has been invaluable, and I'm honored to build upon the remarkable foundation you've established. As I delivered my prepared remarks about Argonne's future, emphasizing innovation, integrity, and sustainable growth, I could see Theo whispering urgently to the chief legal officer, who stood nearby. The lawyer shook his head slightly, responding in hushed tones that clearly did not satisfy my husband. Lizzie, meanwhile, had recovered enough to adopt a poised expression, though her eyes darted nervously around the room, undoubtedly calculating how this unexpected development would affect their plans. I concluded my speech by announcing the formation of several new initiatives, including an enhanced ethics and compliance program. Integrity must be the cornerstone of everything we do, I emphasized, making brief eye contact with Theo. Argonne's reputation for ethical business practices is non-negotiable. When the formal announcements concluded, the room transformed into a reception. Executives and journalists approached to offer congratulations and ask questions about my vision for the company. Through it all, I maintained my composure, answering thoughtfully and projecting confidence. Theo remained on the periphery, his earlier swagger replaced by tense vigilance. He was watching, waiting, clearly trying to determine how to approach this seismic shift in the landscape. His ambition hadn't evaporated, I knew him too well to believe that, but his strategy would need to be entirely recalibrated. I had no intention of making that recalibration easy for him. Sometimes, the most powerful move is patient observation, allowing your opponent to reveal their own weaknesses through hasty reactions. And so I waited, knowing that Theo's confrontation was inevitable, but determined that it would happen on my terms, not his. The reception following the announcement stretched for nearly an hour, during which Theo made no attempt to approach me. Instead, he engaged in intense conversations with various board members, his expression growing increasingly frustrated with each interaction. Lizzie remained close by, occasionally touching his arm in what appeared to be calming gestures. Eventually, as the crowd began to thin, John Argonne took my elbow gently. Virginia, we should head to the board meeting. The executive team is waiting to begin the formal transition briefing. I nodded, gathering my portfolio. Of course, as we turned to leave, Theo finally made his move, stepping directly into our path. Up close, I could see the strain in his features, the tightness around his mouth, the barely contained anger in his eyes. "Virginia," he said, his voice rigidly controlled. "Congratulations on your unexpected promotion. I wonder if we might have a word in private." John tensed beside me, but I placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Thank you, Theo," I replied, my tone pleasant but formal. "Unfortunately, the board is waiting. Perhaps later this afternoon? My assistant will find time in my schedule." A muscle twitched in Theo's jaw. "Your assistant? Yes, I'll be appointing someone today," I said smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, this is ridiculous," Theo hissed, dropping the pretense of civility. "We need to discuss this immediately." "You can't possibly think, Mr. St. George," John interrupted firmly. "As Miss Wolfe mentioned, the board is waiting. Any concerns you have can be addressed through proper channels." I noticed his deliberate use of my maiden name, a small but pointed indication that the personal and professional separation had already begun. Theo's gaze darted between us, clearly weighing his options. Creating a scene would only damage his position further, and he knew it. "Fine," he said finally. "But this conversation will happen, Virginia." "Of course," I agreed calmly. "I'll have my assistant contact you." As we walked away, I felt Lizzie's glare burning into my back. I didn't need to turn around to know she was already formulating counter-strategies, already imagining herself as the power behind Theo's throne in whatever new scenario they were constructing. The boardroom was on the top floor of Argonne's headquarters, a space designed to impress with its panoramic views of the city skyline and its gleaming mahogany table. The executive team rose as John and I entered, their expressions ranging from genuine pleasure to careful neutrality. Gordon was already seated at the head of the table, with 2 empty chairs to his right, positions clearly reserved for John and me. As we took our seats, I noticed Clara Perez, our CTO, giving me a subtle thumbs up from across the table. Clara and I had worked closely on several projects over the years, and her support would be valuable in the days ahead. "Before we begin," Gordon said once everyone was settled, "I want to address what I'm sure is on everyone's mind." The board's decision to appoint Virginia as CEO was unanimous and based entirely on merit. Her vision for the company's future, her proven track record in multiple divisions, and her uncompromising integrity made her the clear choice. He paused, his gaze sweeping around the table. "I'm aware that there may be personal complications given Virginia's relationship with our VP of Global Sales. The board is confident that both executives will handle the situation professionally." Several heads nodded, though I noticed Marcus Reed, the chief marketing officer and one of Theo's close allies, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Now," Gordon continued, "let's discuss the transition plan." The meeting proceeded efficiently, with John outlining key initiatives that would require immediate attention and introducing the transition team that would support me during the first 100 days of my leadership. Throughout the discussion, I remained engaged and focused, asking pertinent questions and offering thoughtful insights. No one mentioned Theo or the awkward scene at the reception, though I caught occasional glances between executives when certain topics arose, particularly when the discussion turned to the sales division's recent performance metrics. As the meeting concluded, John pulled me aside. "You're handling this beautifully," he said quietly, "but brace yourself, Theo won't accept this gracefully." "I know," I replied. "He's probably contacting every ally he has right now, looking for leverage." John's expression turned grim. "There's something else you should be prepared for. The irregularities in the Northeast region that Gordon mentioned. I've seen preliminary evidence suggesting the problem extends further than we initially thought." "How much further?" "Potentially to multiple international territories, all under Theo's ultimate supervision." I absorbed this information, keeping my expression neutral despite the implications. If Theo had been aware of or involved in widespread financial improprieties, the personal betrayal I'd experienced would pale in comparison to his betrayal of the company. "Keep me informed," I said, but ensure the investigation remains independent. I won't have anyone suggesting I'm using this position to settle personal scores. John nodded approvingly. That's why you're the right person for this job, Virginia. As we exited the boardroom, my new executive assistant, temporarily assigned from the executive support pool, approached with a tablet in hand. Miss Wolfe, Mr. St. George has requested an immediate meeting in his office. He says it's urgent. I glanced at my watch. Please inform Mr. St. George that I'm unavailable until this afternoon. I have calls scheduled with our major investors to discuss the transition. He was quite insistent, the assistant said hesitantly. I'm sure he was, I replied with a small smile. Nevertheless, my schedule remains unchanged. Also, please contact Matilda Bryce's office and confirm our meeting for 4 p.m. The attorney? The assistant asked, then immediately flushed. I'm sorry, that was inappropriate. It's all right, I assured her. Yes, Miss Bryce is my attorney. Please ensure that appointment remains confidential. As she hurried away to make the arrangements, I straightened my shoulders and headed toward what had been John's office, and was now mine. I had calls to make, strategies to develop, and a company to lead. Theo's demands would have to wait. He had made me wait alone at a restaurant table on our anniversary. It seemed only fair that he should now experience what it felt like to have one's urgency dismissed. Sometimes, dignity is its own form of power. My first afternoon as CEO was a whirlwind of investor calls, media interviews, and briefings with department heads. By 4 o'clock, when I stepped into the conference room where Matilda Bryce waited, I was mentally exhausted, but determined not to show it. Virginia. Matilda rose to greet me, her trademark crimson suit as sharp as her reputation. At 57, she was the city's premier divorce attorney, known for her surgical precision in high-profile separations. Congratulations on your appointment. Quite the day you're having. Thank you, Matilda, I replied, settling into a chair across from her. I appreciate you making time on such short notice. When Gordon Wolfe calls personally to request my services, I rearrange my schedule, she said, with a thin smile. Now tell me everything. For the next 30 minutes, I laid out the facts of my situation. Theo's abandonment, the anniversary dinner debacle, the evidence of his relationship with Lizzie, and the suspicious timing given my appointment as CEO. Matilda listened intently, occasionally making notes, but mostly observing me with practiced eyes. When I finished, she closed her leather portfolio and leaned forward. Virginia, before we proceed, there's something I need to understand. Your financial stake in Argonne Technologies, tell me about that. I wasn't surprised by the question. Matilda's thoroughness was legendary, and Gordon would have briefed her on the basics. 8 years ago, I invested $2.7 million of my inheritance in Argonne, when the company was facing a hostile takeover attempt, I explained. In exchange, I received a 7% ownership stake, structured through a blind trust, to maintain my anonymity within the company. And now that 7% is worth approximately $120 million based on yesterday's closing stock price. Matilda's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of surprise she allowed herself. And Theo knows nothing about this. No, only John Argonne, Gordon Wolfe and 2 retired board members were aware of the arrangement. The trust was established with strict confidentiality provisions. Fascinating, Matilda murmured. Tell me how this came about, not just the financial facts, but the circumstances. Context matters in these situations. I took a deep breath, remembering that tumultuous period 8 years ago. It was during the Meridian crisis. I began. Our flagship product line had failed spectacularly in final testing. The stock was in freefall, and Meridian Systems was circling, preparing for a hostile takeover. I remember the business headlines. Matilda nodded. Argonne Technologies' miracle recovery, they called it later. The miracle was a dormant patent I discovered while reviewing our intellectual property portfolio, I continued. It offered a viable alternative to the failed product, but developing it required capital we didn't have, especially with our stock price depressed. I paused, remembering the sleepless nights spent analyzing potential solutions, the mounting pressure as Meridian made its intentions increasingly clear. I was 5 years into my career at Argonne, recently married to Theo, who had just been promoted to regional sales director. My grandparents had left me a substantial inheritance, money I'd been conservatively investing while I decided what to do with it. When I realized this patent could save the company, I approached John directly. Matilda listened intently as I described that pivotal meeting with John Argonne, how skeptical he'd been initially, how thorough our analysis had become as we worked through the night, and how we'd finally agreed on terms that would protect both the company and my investment. John suggested the blind trust structure, I explained. He was concerned that if my ownership became public knowledge, it might create complications, both for my career development and for my marriage. How so? Matilda asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Theo was ambitious, competitive, I said carefully. John worried that my financial stake in the company might create tension between us, that Theo might feel overshadowed, or might try to leverage my position for his advancement. A perceptive concern, Matilda noted dryly. And your thoughts at the time? I sighed. I was young in love, and perhaps naive. But I also recognized the wisdom in maintaining separation between my roles as investor and employee. I wanted to earn my promotions on merit, not ownership. So you agreed to the confidentiality provisions? Yes. The trust was established with Gordon as trustee, my shares would remain anonymous, and I would recuse myself from any situations where my dual roles might create conflicts of interest. And for 8 years this arrangement has worked flawlessly, Matilda said, making it a statement rather than a question. Now as CEO and during divorce proceedings, the situation becomes considerably more complex. That's why I need your counsel, I acknowledged. Not just for the divorce, but for navigating the disclosure of my ownership stake. Matilda tapped her pen thoughtfully against her portfolio. The timing is delicate. If you reveal your ownership now, immediately after becoming CEO and filing for divorce, it could appear calculated, as if you've been concealing assets. But I haven't been, I pointed out. The trust has been properly reported on all tax filings. Theo and I maintain separate finances beyond our household accounts, a structure he preferred, given his frequent complaints about my excessive cautions with money. That separate financial structure may prove advantageous, Matilda noted. But we still need to approach this strategically. She paused, studying me. Virginia, there's something else I need to understand. When you invested in Argonne, was it purely a business decision, or was there a personal element as well? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I'm asking if your investment was partly motivated by a desire to protect Theo's career. If Argonne had failed or been acquired, his rising trajectory would have been disrupted. I hadn't considered that perspective before, but as Matilda's words sank in, I recognized the truth in them. I was investing in a company I believed in, I said slowly. But yes, I was also protecting our future, Theo's and mine. I saw our fortunes as intertwined. And now I see that I was protecting a future that existed only in my imagination, I replied, surprising myself with the clarity of the realization. Theo's vision for our life together was very different from mine. I just didn't recognize the divergence until it was too late. Matilda nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. We'll need to disclose your ownership stake soon, ideally before Theo's attorneys can discover it and frame it as a concealed asset. But first, we need to secure your position as CEO beyond any challenge Theo might mount. What do you suggest? A comprehensive strategy, Matilda said decisively. Legal, financial, and corporate. By the time we're finished, Virginia, your husband will regret ever underestimating you, both as a wife and as a business leader. For the first time since receiving Theo's letter, I felt a genuine smile form. That, I said, sounds exactly like what I need. The prenuptial agreement is our first line of defense, Matilda said, reviewing the document I'd provided from my personal files. We had moved to my new office, John's former space, after security had cleared it of any listening devices or cameras. Such precautions might seem paranoid, but in the corporate world I inhabited, they were merely prudent. Theo insisted on it, I explained. He had family money, Not substantial, but enough that his parents were concerned about protecting it. Matilda's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. How fortuitous. This clause here is particularly valuable. She pointed to a section on page 4. Assets acquired or appreciated during the marriage remain separate property if not commingled. Your Argonne shares never touch joint accounts. Never. The dividends went directly to a private account in my name only. Excellent. She made a note, and this clause regarding career advancement is equally helpful. Both parties explicitly waived any claim to compensation or benefits resulting from the other's career advancement or business relationships. Theo was worried about my family connections, I explained. My father sits on several corporate boards. Theo thought I might eventually leverage those relationships. Instead, you built your own path, Matilda observed. The prenup is solid, but Theo will still fight. Men like him always do, especially when their pride is wounded. She wasn't wrong. Theo's ego had always been his vulnerability, driving both his ambition and his poor decisions. Now, Matilda continued, let's discuss the trust holding your Argonne shares. I've reviewed the documentation Gordon provided, and it's impressively thorough. The question isn't whether your ownership is legally protected, it is, but how to reveal it strategically. The board should know immediately, I said. Transparency with them is essential for maintaining trust during this transition. Agreed. But the timing and method of wider disclosure requires careful consideration. Matilda tapped her pen against the desk thoughtfully. There's also the matter of these financial irregularities in the sales division. If Theo is implicated, the sequencing becomes even more delicate. The intercom on my desk buzzed. Miss Wolfe. My assistant's voice came through. Mr. St. George is insisting on seeing you. He's rather adamant. I exchanged glances with Matilda, who raised an eyebrow. It was only a matter of time, I said. To my assistant I replied, please inform Mr. St. George that I'm in a meeting. I can see him at 5:30. Yes, Miss Wolfe. Matilda checked her watch. That gives us 30 minutes to finalize our approach. I suggest we call Gordon in. As trustee of your shares and board chairman, his input will be valuable. I nodded and asked my assistant to have Gordon join us. While we waited, Matilda outlined her recommended strategy. We would inform the board of my ownership stake at tomorrow morning's emergency meeting, immediately establish an independent committee to oversee the financial irregularities investigation, and file divorce papers the following day. The sequencing matters, she emphasized. Corporate transparency first, then personal action. It reinforces that you're prioritizing company interests above personal matters. Gordon arrived moments later, his expression grim. Theo's been busy, he said without preamble. He's contacted 3 board members already, suggesting your appointment was the result of personal bias against him. That was predictable, I replied. What's their response? Skepticism, thankfully. Your track record speaks for itself, and his timing seems suspiciously self-serving. Gordon settled into a chair beside Matilda. More concerning is what Clara just shared with me. Apparently, Theo has been accessing sales databases outside normal protocols, specifically, records related to the Northeast Region investigation. He's covering his tracks, Matilda said sharply. Or trying to determine how much we know, I suggested. Has it restricted his access? Gordon nodded. Clara implemented emergency protocols as soon as she detected the unusual activity. His credentials have been temporarily suspended for system maintenance. He'll see that as confirmation we're moving against him, I noted. Which makes this confrontation at 5:30 all the more volatile, Matilda observed. Virginia, I strongly advise having security present. I considered this recommendation. No, that would escalate the situation unnecessarily, but I would like both of you to stay. Theo needs to understand that I'm not isolated or vulnerable. They exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. Now I continued. Let's finalize the board presentation for tomorrow. I want every aspect of my ownership disclosure to be transparent and comprehensive. For the next 20 minutes we refined our approach, anticipating questions and preparing responses. Gordon provided insights on each board member's likely concerns, while Matilda ensured our legal positioning was impeccable. At precisely 5:30, my assistant's voice came through the intercom again. Miss Wolfe, Mr. St. George is here for your meeting. I took a deep breath, straightened my posture and replied, please send him in. The door opened to reveal Theo, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. His tie was slightly askew, his expression thunderous. He stopped short when he saw Gordon and Matilda. I requested a private meeting, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. You requested a meeting, I corrected calmly. I determined the parameters. Please, take a seat. His gaze flickered between Gordon and Matilda, recognition dawning as he identified the latter. A divorce attorney, Virginia. Really? We haven't even discussed. Your letter made the situation quite clear, I interrupted. As did the diamond on Miss Crawford's finger. I'm merely responding accordingly. Theo's jaw tightened, but he moved further into the room, choosing to remain standing rather than sit. This CEO appointment, he began. The timing is suspicious at best, vindictive at worst. The board's decision was unanimous, and based entirely on merit, Gordon interjected smoothly. The succession planning process began months ago, long before your personal situation developed. Convenient, Theo scoffed. And now my system access has been revoked. Are you really going to be this petty, Virginia? That decision was made by IT security after detecting unusual database activity, I explained, my voice level. It's standard protocol when potential data breaches are identified. I could see the calculation in his eyes as he processed this information. Theo had always been quick, it was part of what made him effective in sales. So that's how it's going to be, he said finally. A corporate witch hunt disguised as security protocols. The board will see through this, Virginia. The board, Gordon said firmly, has full confidence in Virginia's leadership and integrity. Any investigation into financial irregularities will be conducted by an independent committee with no reporting relationship to the CEO. Theo's expression faltered momentarily before he regained his composure. And what about our marriage? 10 years dismissed without a conversation. The audacity nearly took my breath away. Matilda shifted beside me, but I raised a hand slightly, signaling I would handle this. You dismissed our marriage when you left me sitting alone at our anniversary dinner, I replied, my voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to rise. You dismissed it when you began your relationship with Lizzie. You dismissed it with your letter. I'm simply acknowledging what you've already decided. For a moment, something like regret flickered across his face. Then his expression hardened. You've clearly made your decisions, both professionally and personally. Yes, I agreed simply. I have. Theo turned to leave, then paused at the door. This isn't over, Virginia, not by a long shot. After he departed, silence hung in the office. Finally, Gordon spoke. That went about as expected. Actually, Matilda said, it was quite revealing. He's already pivoting from outrage to strategic planning. We need to move quickly. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. First thing tomorrow, we inform the board of my ownership stake, then we accelerate the financial investigation. The protective measures I'd put in place years ago, the prenuptial agreement, the blind trust, the careful separation of finances, had never been intended for this scenario. I had created them believing I was protecting a shared future, not preparing for its dissolution. Yet here they were, serving as my armor in a battle I never wanted to fight. The boardroom was silent, as I concluded my presentation the next morning. 14 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to admiration to careful neutrality. I had just revealed my 7% ownership stake in Argonne Technologies, explaining the circumstances of my investment 8 years ago and the blind trust structure that had kept it confidential. To summarize, I said, standing confidently at the head of the table, my shares have been properly reported in all SEC filings, though the blind trust structure meant my name was not publicly associated with the holdings. The trust has been administered with complete propriety by Gordon, with all dividends and capital gains appropriately declared on my personal tax returns. Martin Wells, our longest-serving board member and one often aligned with Theo's priorities, was the first to speak. Why reveal this now, Virginia? Why not when you were appointed CEO? A fair question, I acknowledged. The board selected me as CEO based on my qualifications and vision for the company, not my ownership position. I wanted that decision to stand on its merits before introducing this additional factor. And the timing relative to your personal situation. Martin pressed, his tone carefully neutral. My husband abandoned our marriage yesterday. I stated matter-of-factly. While that is personally devastating, it does not affect my professional responsibilities. However, it does necessitate disclosure of my ownership stake now, before divorce proceedings begin, to ensure complete transparency. Clara Perez nodded approvingly. I commend your forthright approach, Virginia. Many executives would handle this differently. Indeed, echoed Rajiv Mehta, our newest board member. Your investment quite literally saved this company during the Meridian crisis. That deserves recognition, not concealment. The discussion continued for another 30 minutes, with questions about voting rights, potential conflicts of interest, and governance protocols. I answered each query directly, occasionally deferring to Gordon, or to Emily Chen, Argonne's corporate counsel, who had helped prepare the disclosure materials. I believe we've covered the essential points, Gordon said finally. Unless there are further questions about Virginia's ownership stake, we should move to the next agenda item, the preliminary findings regarding financial irregularities in the sales division. A subtle tension rippled through the room. Several board members exchanged glances, while others straightened in their seats. Before we proceed, I said, I want to emphasize that this investigation began weeks before my appointment as CEO, and the findings I'm about to share came to my attention only yesterday. Given my relationship with the head of global sales, I've recused myself from any direct involvement in the investigation moving forward. Emily took over, presenting the forensic accounting team's preliminary findings with clinical precision. Unusual commission structures. Undocumented client entertainment expenses. Discrepancies between contracted terms and actual pricing. Pattern anomalies across multiple international territories. At this stage, Emily concluded, we cannot determine whether these irregularities represent systemic failure of controls, individual misconduct, or more widespread corruption. However, the patterns are concerning enough to warrant a comprehensive independent investigation. And Theo St. George's involvement? Martin asked directly. Unknown at this time, Emily replied. As head of global sales, he bears ultimate responsibility for compliance within his division, but we have no direct evidence linking him personally to any improprieties. Yet his access to company systems was revoked yesterday. Martin noted, glancing at me with narrowed eyes. That action was taken by IT security after detecting unusual database activity. Clara explained before I could respond. Mr. St. George attempted to access and download significant volumes of sales data outside normal protocols. As CTO, I authorized the temporary credential suspension as a standard security measure. Martin seemed about to press further when the boardroom door burst open. Theo stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger, Lizzie hovering anxiously behind him. Is this how it's going to be? He demanded, looking directly at me. Secret board meetings to orchestrate my removal. Gordon rose immediately. This is a scheduled board meeting, Theo. You were not invited because matters concerning your department are under discussion. Matters concerning, Theo broke off, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the presentation still displayed on the screen. His expression shifted as comprehension dawned. You're investigating my division based on what? Virginia's vindictive accusations. Mr. St. George, Emily said coolly. The investigation was initiated by the audit committee 3 weeks ago, following standard protocols when anomalies are detected. Your wife, Miss Wolf, has recused herself entirely. Theo's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. Recused herself? After she's poisoned the well? After she's hidden her ownership of the company for years? My ownership stake was established through proper legal channels and has been disclosed to the board. I replied, keeping my voice steady. The timing of this disclosure has nothing to do with the investigation into sales practices. Convenient timing all around, isn't it? Theo's gaze swept the boardroom. She gets appointed CEO the day after I end our marriage. She reveals she secretly owns a significant stake in the company, and suddenly my division is under investigation. He turned to the board members. Don't you see what's happening? This is personal retaliation, not corporate governance. I remained silent, allowing his accusations to hang in the air. The board members watched with varying expressions, but none rushed to his defense. Gordon broke the silence. Theo, you're interrupting a confidential board meeting. I must ask you to leave immediately. I have a right to defend myself, Theo insisted. You'll have that opportunity through proper channels, Gordon replied firmly. For now, this behavior is inappropriate and unprofessional. Security appeared in the doorway, summoned by whom I wasn't sure. 2 officers stood waiting, their presence a silent statement. Theo's gaze locked with mine across the boardroom. In his eyes, I saw fury, betrayal, and underneath it all, a dawning realization that he had severely miscalculated. This isn't over, he said, echoing his words from yesterday. Actually, Theo, I replied calmly. I think it is. As security escorted him and Lizzie away, the boardroom remained silent. After a moment, Martin Wells cleared his throat. While Mr. St. George's approach was inappropriate, he said carefully, his concerns about the appearance of personal motivation should be addressed. Agreed, I said immediately. Which is why I propose we establish an independent special committee to oversee the investigation, comprised of board members with no personal relationship to either myself or Theo, assisted by external counsel and forensic accountants from a firm that has never previously worked with Argonne. I laid out the proposed structure in detail, emphasizing maximum transparency and independence. As I spoke, I could see approval spreading across the faces around the table. Even Martin nodded thoughtfully. A comprehensive approach, Gordon concluded when I finished. All in favor. The vote was unanimous. As the meeting adjourned, Clara approached me. That was masterfully handled, she said quietly. Theo played right into your hands with that outburst. I didn't want it to happen this way, I admitted. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in that confrontation. Clara's expression softened. That's why you're the right person to lead Argonne, Virginia. Power without compassion is just another form of corruption. I nodded, gathering my materials as the boardroom emptied. Through the glass walls, I could see Theo being escorted from the building, his belongings in a cardboard box, the universal symbol of corporate dismissal. The confrontation was over, but the real challenges were just beginning. 3 days after the boardroom confrontation, I sat in my office reviewing the preliminary report from Deloitte's forensic accounting team. The independent special committee had moved with remarkable efficiency, retaining top-tier external investigators and granting them unprecedented access to Argonne's systems and records. What they had uncovered was disturbing. The pattern extends back approximately 3 years, explained Julian Winters, the lead forensic accountant, who sat across from me alongside Raj Patel, the board member chairing the special committee. It begins shortly after Mr. St. George was promoted to VP of Global Sales. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the sinking feeling in my stomach. 3 years ago, around the time our marriage had begun to show its first significant strains. And the scope? I asked. 5 major territories, Raj replied, his normally jovial face serious. Northeast US, Western Europe, Southeast Asia, Brazil and Australia, all territories where Mr. St. George installed new leadership after his promotion. The pattern is sophisticated, Julian added, opening his laptop to display a complex flowchart. Clients were offered preferential pricing or terms in exchange for directing a portion of their payments to consulting firms ostensibly providing market research or implementation services. These consulting firms existed primarily on paper, Raj continued. They would retain a small percentage of the funds and distribute the remainder to shell companies registered in various tax-friendly jurisdictions. And ultimately, I asked, though I suspected the answer. Julian's expression was grim. The money trail becomes more complex, but we've traced significant funds flowing into personal accounts belonging to 7 Argonne sales executives. including substantial deposits to an offshore account under Mr. St. George's control. I closed my eyes briefly. Quantify substantial. Approximately $4.3 million over 3 years, Julian replied, with another $2.7 million distributed among the other executives. $7 million. The scale was staggering, not enough to materially impact Argonne's financial statements, but devastating from a compliance and ethical perspective. The evidence is conclusive, I asked. Raj nodded soberly. The special committee believes so. The documentation is extensive, the money trail clear despite attempts to obscure it. We've consulted outside counsel, who advises that we have an obligation to report these findings to the SEC and Department of Justice. I concur, I said, without hesitation. Argonne must demonstrate zero tolerance for this behavior, regardless of who is involved. The board will meet tomorrow to review the full report and vote on next steps, Raj explained. Given your personal connection to Mr. St. George, the special committee recommends you continue your recusal from all decisions regarding this matter. Of course, I agreed. My only request is that we handle this with appropriate care for the innocent employees in the sales division. The misconduct appears limited to senior leadership, not the rank-and-file sales team. Already part of our recommendations, Raj assured me. We're proposing a comprehensive communication plan and support resources for affected staff. After they departed, I sat alone in my office, watching the city lights emerge as dusk fell. The systematic fraud Theo had orchestrated, not just financial misconduct, but a fundamental betrayal of everything Argonne stood for, was difficult to reconcile with the man I thought I had married. Had I truly been so blind? Or had Theo simply become someone different over time, corrupted by ambition and opportunity? My phone buzzed with an incoming text from Matilda. Judge granted the temporary restraining order. Theo cannot access joint accounts or enter the house. Security detail confirmed. Another layer of protection activated. After Theo's boardroom outburst, Matilda had recommended immediate legal measures to protect both my personal safety and financial interests. The evidence of Theo's financial misconduct at Argonne raised serious concerns about what he might do with our joint assets. My assistant appeared at the door. Miss Wolfe, Clara Perez is here to see you. Send her in, I replied, grateful for the interruption of my thoughts. Clara entered, tablet in hand. I thought you should see this immediately, she said, without preamble, placing the device before me. On the screen was an email from Theo to the entire sales organization, sent from his personal account an hour ago. Team, by now you've heard about the so-called investigation into our division. Make no mistake, this is a politically motivated witch hunt orchestrated by my estranged wife to undermine our success and justify her hostile takeover of leadership. The sales strategies we've employed have been innovative and effective, delivering record results for Argonne. Any accounting irregularities are merely creative business structures, designed to maximize competitive advantage in challenging markets. Stand firm, the truth will prevail. Theo St. George. He sent this to over 400 employees, Clara said, her voice tight with controlled anger. It blocked it from internal servers, but many received it on their personal devices before we could intervene. I read the message again, noting the calculated language, creative business structures instead of fraud, politically motivated instead of legally required, estranged wife to evoke sympathy. How's the sales team responding? I asked. Mixed, Clara replied. Most are confused and anxious. Some senior leaders are notably silent. A few vocal supporters are repeating his claims in private messaging channels. I considered our options carefully. We need to accelerate our communication plan. The special committee should issue a factual statement explaining the investigation's origin and process, emphasizing its independence. No direct reference to Theo's email, that would only amplify it. Clara nodded. I'll speak with Raj immediately. Also, I added, please ask HR to schedule listening sessions with sales teams across all regions. They need an opportunity to ask questions and express concerns in a supportive environment. After Clara left, I stared at Theo's message again. His approach was predictable: attack the process, frame himself as a victim, rally supporters through tribal loyalty. It was the same strategy he had employed throughout his career when facing challenges. But this time, he was fighting against evidence too substantial to dismiss. The systematic investigation had uncovered not just isolated incidents, but a pattern of deliberate fraud extending across years and continents. My phone rang. Gordon Wolfe. Virginia, he said, when I answered. The special committee has unanimously recommended terminating Theo's employment for cause effective immediately. The full board vote is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow, but I wanted you to know in advance. Thank you, Gordon, I replied. What about the other executives involved? Same recommendation. The evidence against all 7 is definitive. After we hung up, I walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. In less than a week, my life had transformed completely, from wife to soon-to-be ex, from executive to CEO, from trusting partner to target of Theo's desperate accusations. Yet despite the personal turmoil, I felt a strange clarity. The systematic investigation had revealed truths that needed to be confronted, not just about Theo's financial misconduct, but about the fundamental character of the man I had married. Sometimes, seeing clearly requires looking at evidence we'd prefer to ignore. 2 weeks after Theo's termination, I stood before the assembled employees of Argonne Technologies headquarters, about to address them directly for the first time since the scandal broke. The company auditorium was filled to capacity, with employees from international offices joining via video conference. The atmosphere was tense but expectant, a company waiting to hear how its new leader would guide them through the crisis. Thank you all for being here today, I began, my voice steady, despite the nerves fluttering in my stomach. The past 2 weeks have been challenging for Argonne Technologies. The misconduct uncovered in our sales division has shaken confidence, both externally and within our own walls. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some appeared anxious, others resolute, many simply uncertain. I won't rehash the details of what occurred. The facts have been thoroughly documented and communicated. Instead, I want to focus on what happens next, how we rebuild, strengthen, and move forward together. Over the next 30 minutes, I outlined my vision for Argonne's renewal: enhanced compliance systems, a revitalized corporate culture emphasizing ethical behavior, and a restructured sales organization focused on sustainable growth rather than short-term metrics. Throughout, I emphasized transparency and accountability, acknowledging the damage done while refusing to allow it to define our future. I understand that many of you have questions about my own role in these events, I said, addressing the elephant in the room. As the wife of the former VP of Sales, as a significant shareholder, as your new CEO, it's natural to wonder about what I knew and when. I took a deep breath. The truth is simpler than the rumors suggest. I invested in Argonne 8 years ago, because I believed in this company's potential and its values. I maintained confidentiality around that investment to ensure my career advancement was based on merit, not ownership. And I was as shocked as anyone by the misconduct uncovered in the sales division. The room was utterly silent, hundreds of employees hanging on every word. But explanations, while necessary, aren't enough. Sanctions matter more. Which is why today, I'm announcing several initiatives designed to strengthen Argonne and restore confidence in our leadership. I outline the plans developed over countless late nights with a core team of trusted executives and outside advisors, a new ethics hotline reporting directly to the audit committee, expanded financial training for all managers, a revised compensation structure, reducing emphasis on short-term sales targets, and a company-wide collaboration platform to break down the departmental silos that had enabled misconduct to flourish undetected. As I concluded my formal remarks and opened the floor for questions, I saw something shift in the room, a cautious optimism replacing resignation, a willingness to engage rather than withdraw. The questions came rapidly, some challenging, some supportive, all substantive. I answered each directly, refusing to hide behind corporate jargon or vague assurances. When I didn't know an answer, I said so plainly, promising to follow up once I had accurate information. After the town hall, Clara approached me as employees filed out of the auditorium. "That went better than expected," she said quietly. "You've given people something to rally around. It's a start, I acknowledged. But we need to build a broader coalition to truly transform the culture. Speaking of which, Clara replied, there's someone you should meet. She gestured to a woman waiting nearby, mid-30s, with a confident posture and intelligent eyes. This is Matilda Chen from the Singapore office. She flew in specifically to speak with you. Miss Wolf. Matilda extended her hand. Thank you for making time in your schedule. Of course, I replied, though I had no idea who she was or why Clara thought we should connect. Shall we talk in my office? As we walked, Clara explained that Matilda led the Asia-Pacific Technical Implementation Team, the group responsible for deploying Argon's systems for clients across the region. 2 years ago, Clara continued, Matilda raised concerns about irregularities in several major contracts in Southeast Asia. Her reports disappeared into the sales division without action. They were dismissed as technical nitpicking, Matilda added, her tone matter-of-fact rather than bitter. Mr. St. George personally assured me that the contract terms were standard for the region. In my office, Matilda shared documents she had preserved, emails, meeting notes and technical specifications that, in retrospect, clearly indicated the preferential arrangements later identified by the forensic accountants. Why bring these to me now? I asked. Because you asked for questions today, and you answered them honestly, Matilda replied. That hasn't happened at Argon in a long time. She wasn't the only one. Throughout the day, other employees sought me out, some in person, others via email, or through their department heads. A financial analyst who had questioned unusual payment structures, an IT specialist who had noticed irregular system access patterns, a marketing manager who had been excluded from client meetings that traditionally included her function. Each had observed fragments of the larger fraud. None had seen the complete picture, and many had been discouraged from pursuing their concerns, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. We need to connect these people, I told Gordon during our end-of-day briefing. Their collective insight could help us identify vulnerabilities we haven't yet addressed. A cross-functional integrity task force, he suggested. Exactly. But not just senior leaders, we need voices from throughout the organization, people who see operations from different perspectives. By week's end, we had assembled a diverse group of 20 employees, representing various departments, levels and regions, who had demonstrated both ethical awareness and courage in challenging questionable practices. I charged them with conducting a comprehensive review of our business processes, identifying potential vulnerabilities and recommending reforms. Their work began immediately, with a level of energy and commitment that proved infectious. Other employees, seeing that whistleblowers were being empowered rather than marginalized, began sharing their own observations and concerns. You've started something remarkable, Clara observed, as we reviewed the task force's preliminary findings late one evening. People who never spoke up before are finding their voices. They always had voices, I replied. They just needed to know someone was listening. The coalition continued to grow, expanding beyond the formal task force to include informal networks of employees committed to rebuilding Argon's ethical foundation. They became ambassadors for the new culture we were trying to create, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in it. 3 weeks after the town hall, Raj Patel approached me after a board meeting. I have to admit, I was skeptical about your ability to lead through this crisis, he said candidly. The personal connection to Theo seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. And now? I asked. Now I see it as perhaps your greatest strength, he replied. You understand the human cost of ethical failures in a way most executives never will. That perspective is proving invaluable. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how quickly circumstances had changed. The betrayal that had shattered my personal life had also created an opportunity to rebuild something stronger. Not just for myself, but for the hundreds of employees who had placed their trust in Argon Technologies. The coalition we were building wasn't just about preventing future misconduct. It was about creating a company where integrity wasn't just a policy, but a lived reality. That was a purpose worth fighting for. The Four Seasons private dining room offered the perfect blend of elegance and discretion, neutral territory, for what promised to be a tense negotiation. I arrived 15 minutes early, reviewing key points with Matilda Bryce one final time before Theo and his attorney were scheduled to appear. Remember, Matilda advised, arranging documents meticulously on the polished table. He's coming from a position of weakness, regardless of how he postures. The forensic evidence is irrefutable, and the SEC investigation is advancing. This meeting is a courtesy, not a necessity. I nodded, adjusting my sleeve to cover the barely faded bruise on my wrist, a souvenir from Theo's unexpected and unwelcome appearance at our home last week, despite the restraining order. The security team had removed him promptly, but not before he had grabbed my arm, demanding to talk sense into me. Miss Wolfe, the maitre appeared at the door. Mr. St. George and his counsel have arrived. Thank you. Please show them in. Theo entered first, followed by James Harrington, a silver-haired attorney known for representing executives in white-collar criminal matters. Theo had lost weight in the month since his termination, his designer suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a tightly controlled rigidity. Virginia, he acknowledged coldly, taking a seat across from me. Theo, I replied with professional courtesy. Mr. Harrington. The attorney nodded, placing his briefcase on the table. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. My client believes there is a mutually beneficial resolution to be found here. Matilda smiled thinly. We're certainly open to proposals that serve Miss Wolfe's interests and those of Argonne Technologies. Let's be direct, Theo interjected, leaning forward. This witch hunt has gone far enough. The SEC investigation, the divorce proceedings, the restraining order, it's excessive and unnecessary. I met his gaze steadily. The SEC investigation is beyond my control, Theo. As for the restraining order, that became necessary after your unannounced visit to my home. Our home, he corrected sharply. The property deed and mortgage are solely in Miss Wolfe's name, Matilda reminded him, as established in the prenuptial agreement you both signed. Harrington cleared his throat. Let's focus on the path forward. My client is prepared to make certain concessions regarding the division of assets in exchange for Argonne Technologies using its influence to moderate the SEC's approach. That's not possible, I replied immediately. Argonne is cooperating fully with regulatory authorities, as we're legally required to do. There are degrees of cooperation, Harrington suggested delicately. Emphasizing certain interpretations of events could significantly impact outcomes. Matilda's expression hardened. If you're suggesting Miss Wolfe should in any way misrepresent facts to federal investigators, this meeting is over. No one is suggesting that, Theo said quickly, shooting a warning glance at his attorney. But there are legitimate gray areas in how business practices are characterized. Creative sales strategies versus fraud is often a matter of interpretation. The $4.3 million in your offshore account isn't a gray area, I noted calmly. Nor are the documented kickbacks. Theo's facade cracked slightly, anger flashing across his features. You've always been so righteous, Virginia, so certain of your moral superiority, but you were happy enough to enjoy the lifestyle my sales strategies provided. I was unaware of your methods, I replied evenly. And I've provided complete financial records, proving I never benefited from those funds. Harrington intervened smoothly, redirecting the conversation to specific terms of a potential settlement. As he outlined Theo's proposal, essentially offering to relinquish claims to my Argonne shares in exchange for my support in mitigating the criminal investigation, I studied my husband's face. The man I had loved for a decade was still visible beneath the desperation and anger. But now I could also see what I had missed before. The calculation in his eyes, the reflexive dishonesty in his reasoning, the fundamental belief that rules existed for others, not for him. This proposal is unacceptable, Matilda stated after Harrington finished. Miss Wolfe will not compromise her integrity or Argonne's compliance obligations. However, we have a counteroffer. She slid a document across the table, terms I had approved the previous day after careful consideration. As Theo read the proposal, his expression shifted from expectation to disbelief. You can't be serious, he said finally, looking up at me. I'm entirely serious, I replied. Those are my final terms. Complete surrender of all assets acquired through fraudulent means. Theo read aloud from the document, his voice tight with controlled fury. Full cooperation with SEC and DOJ investigations. Waiver of all claims against Argonne Technologies and its executives. And in exchange, he looked up incredulous. I get to avoid your active opposition to a plea deal. Those are the terms, I confirmed calmly. Your cooperation now could make a significant difference in sentencing recommendations. The authorities are more interested in the network of accomplices than in making an example of you personally. This is extortion, Theo snapped, pushing the document away. Matilda's response was measured but firm. No, Mr. St. George. This is the natural consequence of your actions. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Miss Wolfe is offering you a path that preserves some dignity and potentially reduces your exposure. Harrington leaned in to whisper urgently in Theo's ear. After a moment of intense private conversation, Theo's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. I need time to consider this, he said finally, his voice stripped of its earlier bravado. Of course, I replied. You have until tomorrow at noon. After that we proceed with all available legal remedies. As Harrington gathered the documents, Theo's gaze locked with mine across the table. For a brief moment, the mask of anger dropped, revealing something more complex, perhaps regret, perhaps just the dawning reality of his situation. Could we have a moment alone? He asked unexpectedly. Both attorneys immediately objected, but I raised a hand. It's all right. 5 minutes. After they reluctantly departed, leaving the door slightly ajar, Theo and I sat in silence that stretched between us like a physical presence. Why did you do it? I asked finally, the question that had haunted me for weeks. We had everything: success, respect, a good life together. Why risk it all? Theo seemed to age before my eyes, the practiced charm giving way to genuine weariness. It started small, he admitted. A special arrangement with one client who needed flexibility on terms. Then another. It was so easy, Virginia. The system had so many gaps, and no one was looking closely. I was looking, I said quietly. Just not at you. I trusted you completely. A flicker of shame crossed his features. I know, that made it easier, in some ways. You were so focused on your projects, your career advancement. We started living parallel lives. That doesn't explain Lizzie, I noted, keeping my voice level despite the tightness in my chest. Theo's laugh was hollow. Lizzie understood the game. She admired the risks I took, the corners I cut. She made me feel powerful when I was with her. You always made me feel like I had to measure up to some impossible standard. Basic ethics isn't an impossible standard, Theo. To you, maybe. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it sent an unexpected pang through me. I always felt I was one mistake away from losing your respect. With Lizzie, there were no expectations beyond success, however it was achieved. I absorbed this, recognizing the fundamental disconnect that had always existed between us, masked by mutual ambition and superficial compatibility. Where is she now? I asked, though I wasn't sure why I wanted to know. Gone, Theo replied flatly. She left the day after the board terminated me, said she needed space to reevaluate. Took the engagement ring with her though. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of sympathy. I'm sorry, are you? His eyes met mine, searching. Yes, I said honestly. Not for the consequences you're facing. Those are deserved. But I am sorry for what we lost, what we thought we had. Theo nodded slowly. For what it's worth, which isn't much now, I do regret hurting you. The company politics, the financial maneuvers, that was business. But the way I ended our marriage was cruel. Yes, it was. I agreed simply. We sat in silence for another moment, the weight of a decade together, and all that had been broken settling between us. I'll sign your agreement, he said finally. Not because I have much choice, but because I'm tired of fighting. It's time to face what I've done. As we stood to call the attorneys back in, Theo paused. You'll be an exceptional CEO, Virginia. You always saw things more clearly than the rest of us. Except when it came to you, I reminded him gently. Except then, he acknowledged with a sad smile. Goodbye, Virginia. As he walked out of the dining room after signing the agreement, I realized it was likely the last time we would speak directly. Our remaining interactions would be through attorneys, formal statements, legal proceedings. 10 years of marriage ended in a private dining room, with signatures on documents that reduced love and betrayal to clinical legal terminology. It wasn't closure that would come later, if at all, but it was resolution, and for now, that was enough. 6 weeks after Theo signed the settlement agreement, I stood in Argon's newly renovated executive floor, surveying the transformation. Gone were the imposing mahogany doors and frosted glass barriers that had once separated leadership from employees. In their place, collaborative spaces flowed naturally into private meeting areas, with glass walls offering transparency while maintaining acoustic privacy where needed. The last of the technology upgrades will be completed by Friday, Clara explained, walking beside me as we conducted our final inspection. The new communication systems are already operational in all regions except Southeast Asia, and they'll be online by month's end. Excellent, I nodded, pausing to observe a group of engineers and marketing specialists working together in one of the collaborative pods, a cross-functional team that would have been impossible under the old departmental silos, Theo had enforced. The physical renovation reflected deeper changes throughout Argon Technologies. In the aftermath of the sales division scandal, we had seized the opportunity to reimagine not just our organizational structure, but our entire corporate culture. The board was skeptical about investing in this renovation during a crisis, Gordon remarked, joining us as we continued our tour. But you were right, the visible change reinforces the message that we're building something new, not just patching the old system. People need symbols, I replied, especially during transitions. The transition had indeed been comprehensive. With the sales leadership removed, we had promoted from within where possible, identifying employees who had maintained ethical standards despite pressure. Where necessary, we recruited externally, emphasizing cultural fit alongside technical qualifications. More significantly, we had flattened the hierarchy, eliminating unnecessary management layers that had served more as power centers than functional necessities. Information now flowed more freely between departments, with new systems designed to flag potential concerns before they became problems. The quarterly numbers look promising, Gordon continued as we entered my office, a more modest space than John Argon or Theo had occupied, with glass walls that communicated accessibility while still allowing focused work. The market has responded positively to the changes. Our stock is up 12% since your comprehensive plan was announced. Investors appreciate decisive action and transparency, I observed, taking a seat at my desk. But the real test will be sustaining growth while maintaining the ethical standards we've established. Clara smiled. The Integrity Task Force is helping with that. Their monitoring dashboard has already identified 3 contractual arrangements that needed reconsideration, all caught before implementation. And the employee feedback, I asked, reviewing the latest culture survey results on my tablet. Overwhelmingly positive, Gordon confirmed, particularly regarding the new communication channels and ethical guidelines. People feel empowered to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. This was perhaps the most meaningful change, the shift from a culture of compliance to one of active integrity, where employees at all levels felt responsible for upholding Argon's values. My assistant appeared at the door. Miss Wolf, your 2 p.m. is here. The Meridian Systems CEO and their acquisition team. Perfect timing, I said, standing to greet our visitors. This meeting represents the first major growth initiative of our new era. The irony wasn't lost on me. Meridian Systems, once the hostile takeover threat that had prompted my original investment in Argon, was now a potential acquisition target, their innovative technology a perfect complement to our expanded product line. As I welcomed the Meridian executives, I was struck by how different this moment felt from any leadership role I had previously imagined for myself. 6 months ago, I had been a senior executive with a failing marriage, navigating corporate politics while trying to maintain my integrity. Now I stood at Argon's helm, having weathered personal betrayal and corporate crisis to emerge with a clearer vision and stronger purpose than before. Thank you for joining us today. I began, gesturing for the visitors to take their seats around the conference table. We believe this potential partnership represents not just a business opportunity, but a chance to demonstrate how 2 organizations with complementary strengths can create something greater together. As the discussion began, I felt a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with title or position. It stemmed instead from the knowledge that I was finally leading authentically, not as someone's wife, not as a hidden investor, but as exactly who I was, a leader with both the capacity and the commitment to build something worthwhile. Taking command wasn't about power or control, it was about creating the conditions for collective success, and that work was just beginning. 1 year ago today, we faced an existential crisis, I began, addressing the assembled employees who filled Argonne's auditorium for our annual company meeting. A crisis of ethics, of leadership, of trust. Many predicted we wouldn't recover. From the stage, I could see hundreds of familiar faces, some who had been with Argonne for decades, others who had joined during our recent expansion. All had contributed to the remarkable transformation we had achieved. Today, I'm proud to announce that not only have we recovered, we have emerged stronger in every measurable dimension. The slides behind me told the story in compelling data points: revenue up 17% year-over-year, employee satisfaction at its highest level in company history, client retention improved by 23%, ethics hotline reports down by 68%, while positive recognition submissions had increased fivefold. These numbers reflect more than just business success, I continued. They represent a fundamental shift in how we operate, a systemic transformation that touches every aspect of Argonne Technologies. The transformation had indeed been comprehensive, evolving far beyond the initial crisis response into a reimagining of our entire organizational approach. Where once we had rigid hierarchies and siloed departments, we now had flexible teams organized around client needs and innovation priorities. Where information had previously been tightly controlled, we now had transparent systems that made relevant data accessible to those who needed it. Most significantly, we had rebuilt our cultural foundation around what we called the integrity infrastructure, systems, practices, and norms that made ethical behavior the easiest path rather than an additional burden. This transformation wasn't driven from the top down, I emphasized, gesturing to the executive team seated in the front row. It emerged from thousands of conversations, suggestions, and initiatives from people at every level of this organization. You identified the problems, proposed the solutions, and implemented the changes. I invited Matilda Chen to join me on stage, the technical implementation leader from Singapore, who had been among the first to build our Coalition for Change. Now serving as our Chief Ethics Officer, she had designed many of the systems that enabled our transformation. When we began this journey, Matilda said, taking the microphone, many wondered if ethics and profitability were mutually exclusive, if doing the right thing would undermine our competitive position. She smiled. The results speak for themselves. Our ethical framework hasn't constrained our business, it has become our competitive advantage. This wasn't mere corporate rhetoric. Our client research had confirmed that Argonne's reputation for integrity had become a key differentiator in a marketplace increasingly concerned about corporate conduct and sustainability. Prospects who once selected vendors primarily on price and features now included ethical practices in their evaluation criteria. After highlighting key initiatives for the coming year, including an expanded apprenticeship program and new sustainability targets, I concluded with a personal reflection. A year ago, I stood before you during the darkest moment in our company's history. I made promises about the future we would build together. Today, I can say with confidence that you have exceeded every expectation, turning crisis into opportunity and challenge into growth. The standing ovation that followed wasn't for me, but for the collective achievement of an organization that had fundamentally transformed itself. Later that evening, at a more intimate gathering for the leadership team and key contributors to our transformation initiatives, Clara raised a toast. To Virginia, she said, lifting her glass, who showed us that true leadership isn't about control or charisma, but about creating the conditions for everyone to contribute their best. As appreciative murmurs and raised glasses circled the room, I felt a moment of profound gratitude. The personal betrayal that had upended my life had ultimately led to this, not just professional success, but the opportunity to build something authentic and meaningful with people I respected. Thank you, I replied simply. But the real toast should be to systemic transformation, to the idea that organizations like people can evolve beyond their limitations when they commit to something greater than themselves. As conversations flowed around me, I stepped briefly onto the balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. The city lights stretched before me, mirroring the stars above, systems within systems, each connected yet distinct. A year ago, I had been defined by relationships and roles now gone. Today, I stood at the center of a transformed system that reflected my values and vision, surrounded by people who shared that commitment. Some transformations begin with loss, but with courage and clarity, they can end with creation. The charity gala's elegant backdrop provided a stark contrast to my last encounter with Lizzie Crawford 18 months earlier. Then, she had been standing beside Theo in the boardroom, her expression oscillating between triumph and panic. Now, she approached my table hesitantly, looking markedly different, the designer dress and statement jewelry replaced by a simple black cocktail dress, her previously highlighted hair now its natural brown. I had spotted her earlier in the evening, working the event rather than attending as a guest. According to the program, she was the new development coordinator for the Women's Business Initiative, the nonprofit hosting tonight's fundraiser. Miss Wolf, she said, stopping a respectful distance from my table. I wasn't sure if you'd be attending tonight. I can have someone else handle your section if my presence is uncomfortable. That won't be necessary, Lizzie, I replied calmly. It's been a long time. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken history. I owe you an apology, she finally said, her voice quiet but steady. What Theo and I did to you personally, and to Argonne, was inexcusable. I studied her face, searching for the calculation or insincerity I had come to expect from her. Instead, I found only uncomfortable honesty. What happened after Theo left the country? I asked, curious despite myself. The last I'd heard, he had relocated to a non-extradition country after completing his cooperation with federal authorities, avoiding prison time but leaving behind his reputation, career, and most of his assets. He asked me to join him, Lizzie admitted. I declined. The person I thought I was in love with didn't really exist. She glanced around the ballroom, where corporate leaders and philanthropists mingled, supporting programs that helped women build careers after personal or professional setbacks. After everything fell apart, I couldn't find work in corporate America. My association with the scandal made me toxic. This organization gave me a second chance when no one else would. And how is that working out? I asked, my tone neutral. She paused, seeming to search for the right words. Healing. Using my skills to help others rather than just advancing my own agenda. It's given me perspective I never had before. I nodded, understanding better than she might realize. My own journey had taught me similar lessons, albeit through different circumstances. Your transformation of Argonne has been remarkable, Lizzie continued. The ethics framework you implemented is being studied in business schools now. It's become the gold standard. It was a collective effort, I replied automatically. But it required your leadership, she insisted. Not everyone would have used that crisis as an opportunity for positive change. Before I could respond, the event director approached, needing Lizzie's assistance with a donor. She excused herself, then hesitated. Virginia, she said, using my first name for the first time, I know this doesn't erase what happened, but I am truly sorry. What you've built from the ashes of that betrayal is extraordinary. As she walked away, Clara rejoined me at the table, following my gaze. Was that? Yes, I confirmed. Life takes unexpected turns. Are you all right? Clara asked, concerned. I considered the question seriously. The wound of betrayal had long since healed, leaving behind not a scar but a kind of wisdom, a deeper understanding of both human frailty and resilience. I'm more than all right, I answered truthfully. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And in that moment of unexpected reconciliation, the circle that had begun with betrayal was finally complete.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.